Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations on thought leaders in India and abroad. Today, our distinguished guest is Dhruva Bhat, probably the youngest guest I ever had on my program. Because at a very young age, he has accomplished so much, and he knows so much, and he has so many views. I thought I should invite him to my program. Thank you for coming, Dhruva.
Of course, it's my pleasure to be here, and I think given today's topic, it's especially appropriate, TPS, for how we met, which is that both of us were chief guests at a school's Model United Nations conference, and I was lucky enough to be in the audience for that, and I heard Ambassador Sreenivasan give these incredibly clear and optimistic views about the role of international organizations like the United Nations in responding to COVID. And I felt like I had to send him a note afterwards, just sort of expressing my admiration. And I'm so glad that email has turned into this. So really glad to be here and honored to be here.
Yes, but I must say in return that your own speech about research there was the one which attracted me to you. So it is mutual.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Okay, let me tell them about your education. The incredible, I would call it a dream education. So he does school in Chennai, then goes to the United States and goes straight to Harvard of all universities and gets a bachelor's degree. Then he gets a Rhodes Scholarship and then goes to Oxford, does a master's, and now back again in Oxford, do a PhD on international development. You could not have dreamt of a better education career. Of course, he has done other things in between. He has been a leader of the Indian debating team in several international competitions. Then he has promoted various NGOs, done a lot. In all these, how many years?
I'm 26, turning 27 next August.
Yeah, so that is remarkable for a 26-year-old. So let us hear your views on many of these things. Well, Dhruva will start talking about one thing that people say about education in India. Whether it is the president of India or the lowest functionary in the universities ask this question. How come India is not on the list of world-class universities? Not even 100. Because that was the old question. Now one or two have got into 100. But still the reality remains that in spite of the reputation that India has had of a good educational system, how come that India is not on the very top of the world-class universities? Not even a few of them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I'd say we should think about that in two sort of parts. One part is there are things about these rankings, international rankings, that are good, and we should take those on board. And there are things about the international rankings that are very not good, and we should acknowledge where those rankings fall short and where our Indian universities might actually be doing pretty well. So in terms of what the rankings do well, I think that they definitely do indicate the quality of what the university is contributing in terms of research. So the quality of the papers that professors and researchers at the university are producing, the number of these patents created, things like that, which demonstrate the intellectual output of the university. And then secondly, they also look at things like enrollment, selectivity rates, all of that as well. So I think definitely on some of those standards in terms of pushing and creating an environment where professors and researchers can do really cutting edge research across all disciplines, attracting an international student body from different parts of the world and top-notch talent, I think we can definitely agree that Indian universities are not doing as well as they can. But I would add a caveat to that, which is I think these rankings, like any rankings, have a lot of issues as well. So, for instance, the demographics of the students in terms of whether these students are in need or not isn't really taken into account. You don't take into account in nearly as much as research the quality of the teaching as well. And so the way that you can see this is you can look at a university like Harvard, which does very well in the rankings, but only takes in about 1,600 students every year into its undergraduate body. And in those 1,600, the richest 1% of the US is vastly overrepresented. I think almost 10 to 20% of the student body at Harvard comes from some of the wealthiest sections of American society. And in comparison, even if you look at universities in the US, there are universities like the State University of New York or the City University of New York, SUNY and CUNY, which are these incredible public universities that educate tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands every year, that have adult education programs, part-time programs, flexible programs, to really be a place where students of a vast diversity of backgrounds and in large numbers can attend and participate. And so there are things that are important for a university education, especially in a country that's as populous and as at the income level that India is, that it needs to take into account, which the ranking system doesn't take into account, which I think are important to talk about as well.
Yes, I did a study of this because when I was in education, and the questions were very interesting. The first question was, how many Nobel Prize winners? And number two, how many foreign students? And how many members of the faculty from abroad?
Correct.
How many patents? Mm-hmm. So these are the kind of questions for which it's always a zero for most universities in India. Yeah. In fact, when the Punjabi University was listed in about 200, and when I checked, I found that their research work in agriculture was excellent. Right. It was the only reason. While we have in IITs excellent teaching, but they were not taking that to account. Mm-hmm. And the other thing was not that they will go to every university in the world and to get it. They only look at the universities they know about. They start with Harvard, they know Harvard, so it's easy to put it on top. And then they don't say, but there is a university in Kerala which may be like Harvard. They don't look into it like that. So as you said, there are many anomalies. But it has come to be accepted as some kind of a standard. That is important. And therefore, how much we may disregard this, the international recognition in terms of getting students from abroad or faculty from abroad, etc., it matters. And the funny irony of it is, when somebody applies for jobs to us for any reason, immediately our university will ask, what is the ranking of your university? So you condemn it on the one hand, and the other hand, you follow it like by words from the Bible. So this is and therefore, it's always good to test your performance against these, one or two different standards they have. Because now we have set standards for ourselves. Now we are only ranking system we have also introduced. And that's maybe some satisfaction. And in fact, I had proposed that we should have an assessment system in the state itself to have a monitoring and assessing of our performance, which has just been established. So that may be a useful thing to do also. But the heart of the matter is research is the most important yardstick that people use internationally. And that is true because there is no point in gathering information. You need to create information. And that is the difference between the research in India and the research abroad from what I have seen. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that there's two parts to that. The first is creating an environment where research is possible and easy. And then the second part is actually disseminating that research and trying to get it out into the world. On the first part, it involves setting up for the more technical fields, the infrastructure that's needed. For the humanities and social sciences, having libraries and access to digital collections that are possible. For graduate students and PhD students, paying their stipends on time, offering research grants, having all of that. For professors, ensuring that they've got the assistance they need and a reasonable teaching load such that they can balance their research alongside it. So those are all things which to varying degrees are missing at Indian universities from my reading of them. And then the second part of it, of course, is disseminating that work. So even the research that is being done at Indian universities, I think a lot more could be done in terms of getting it out into the world, whether that's in the STEM fields, creating stronger linkages between universities and industry, or in the humanities and social sciences, creating more platforms for researchers to talk and pass on the knowledge that they have, I think is crucial.
Yes, talking of the conditions and circumstances, it's evident that there are many Indians who have even won Nobel Prizes once they're abroad. Yeah. In India, since Rabindranath Tagore, we have not seen a Nobel Prize. So that means Indians are not that Indians are not getting it, but India is not getting it because of this. And that's an obvious case.
And of course, the one that we did get was Kailash Satyarthi, who is not an academic. So yeah.
No, that was a dubious award.
Okay.
I have had a lot of trouble with him abroad because he always, acted against India's interests on this, working rights of the child. He was very anti-Indian, and that is how he got the prize. If he was defending India, he would not have got it. So on Satyarthi, I have some reservations.
Got it. No, I don't know too much about his work. I just knew that he was the other Indian who's got it since then. And it's telling that it's not in chemistry or physics or medicine.
No, he was an activist. He was an activist.
Exactly. Yeah.
And activist, but he hurt the interests of India in the process. Quite a few legislation in the US against Indian carpets and Indian goods on the basis that children were employed were caused by his activity. That's why he never got any award from India, but got several from the West.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, that's an interruption.
No, of course. But that does bring up an interesting point, which is, I think there's a similar sort of thinking around, especially in social sciences and humanities research as well, a belief that research needs to be immediately useful and it needs to be in the nation's interest. And I think both of those are probably things that we, at least in our regular conversation in India, need to de-link a little bit from universities, because often the research that's being done is not immediately useful. You can't see what the value of it is going to be for years and years and years down the line. And some of it, especially if you think about research in the social sciences and the humanities, is quite critical and is questioning the way that things are done in our country or whichever country that it's located in, asking difficult questions of those in positions of authority. And I think it's important to create an environment in universities where both of those are not just allowed but encouraged. So just what you mentioned sparked that in my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but humanities we can understand. Humanities may not have a direct impact. You cannot have a startup with a humanities PhD. And that has a certain historical background. Mostly it is well bound and kept in the shelf and for your grandchildren to see and say, oh, my grandfather was a researcher. And in America, they say there are PhDs and MDs. These are the medical doctors and PhDs are the poor and hungry doctors. PhDs don't like it.
I will say though, as a poor and hungry doctor in the humanities and social sciences, I think that some of this research can be really valuable. So, for example, one of my favorite examples of this is this sociologist named Ali Russell Hochschild, whose work you may have come across. And one of the things that she identified, which I thought was really useful and has changed a lot of the way that we think about things, is this term called the second shift. So the idea that working women have to do a first shift at their commercial jobs and then have to come back home and then work a second shift where the burden of housework and taking care of children and so on falls on them. Now, this is nothing new. It's not something that we were unaware of before, but I do think that research in the humanities, and she didn't necessarily offer a solution, right? She didn't say, here's the changes we have to make in the law to fix this. But even just identifying that term, giving it a name, carefully observing it and documenting it, I think can be really, really powerful in changing how society thinks. So there's definitely a lot of research in the humanities which sits on the shelves, but I think some of it can be really world-changing.
Right. You are, of course, aware of the new education policy of 2020 for the new government. It has not been implemented. It has something like a 30-year span for things to do, and that is 30 years lost. I would think that I should have thought that this would come even faster. And research is being given great importance in that, but also there are other changes. And you have studied the right to education law, right? And so in relation to that, how do you see the new education policy? It will be a great interest in Kerala because the government of Kerala has objected to most of the provisions of the...
Right. Yeah, so I haven't my undergraduate thesis was on the Right to Education Act. I haven't studied the NEP in as much detail, but what my research on the Right to Education Act I found really interesting. So I analyzed using this data from Pratham, the NGO that does an annual study of Indian education, how much the implementation of the Right to Education Act has benefited Indian students. And so what my analysis discovered, which I found curious, is that the Right to Education Act has been excellent at ensuring that more schools are being built, that the infrastructure in the schools is better than before, that students have access to these schools. But what it hasn't accomplished, and there's no clarity in the data that this is actually improved, is improving the ability of students to read and write and do the skills that the education that they're meant to be getting should be providing. And there could be lots of reasons for this, ranging from the quality of the teaching to the sort of motivation of the students. I think just having the schools and even getting the students in schools is not sufficient to ensure that they are learning. But it does ask a system-wide question of how best to implement these policies. And my read of the situation, and I don't know if I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree, is that a lot of our education policies, the Right to Education Act for sure, and to some extent the NEP as well, focuses on the input. So it says we want to build more schools, we want to improve our curriculum, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't set targets in terms of outputs or outputs, and say in 5 years time we want to ensure that all students are reading at their appropriate grade level, or we want to ensure that X number of our universities rank in the top 100. Because if you do that, then you've got to be accountable for it, you've got to track it. And I think that's what really pushes organizations, and that includes the government, to really be thoughtful about how they are implementing these policies. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on that, whether you think the NEP makes a difference in that sense, which is setting clear targets in terms of outcomes and focusing on that.
Well, I like the NEP basically because it advocates a liberal education and choice-based. Because at least in Kerala, there is no choice. You can only have these groups: physics, chemistry, biology, or physics, chemistry, mathematics, and then or of course history, economics, and politics. And these are only three branches you have. You cannot vote, and that option really has no meaning because they don't even know what they're going to study or whatever. It is just on the basis of some kind of fancy thing about being an engineer or a doctor or something people join. And then after a year, they realize that was the wrong choice. And there is no escaping that. And now there are two or three things. One, of course, making universities multidisciplined institutions. Even IITs are changing, as you know. And that enables people to shift around. Because shifting around from one course to the other is impossible. Even within the state, within the Kerala state, you cannot shift from one university to the other without a lot of problems, and the credit cannot be transferred. And all. So this new 4-year degree course, which you are familiar, probably you must have done a 4-year degree course, and with the possibility of exits in between, and being able to put your credits in a bank, I thought that was a very major innovation that they have brought about.
Yeah, I benefited hugely from that system. So the school that I went to in Chennai, TPS Senior Secondary School, is academically a very strong school, but it's definitely oriented more towards the IITs, NITs types of universities. Very few students applied abroad for undergrad from my school. And for me, the reason that I applied abroad was because I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't feel comfortable picking one subject and then just committing to it for all of undergrad. And the idea that in the US, I could explore different topics and then pick one was just amazing to me. And because I'd done debating in high school, I knew that broadly I wanted to be in the social sciences, but whether I wanted to do political science or economics or something else, I wasn't sure about. And I fully agree with you that the multidisciplinary system that I experienced at Harvard was just life-changing, because to begin with, I could take courses in my first year in political science, economics, religion, law, and based on all of these, make a more informed decision about what I wanted to major in. And even once I had decided my major, I could still take courses in psychology, in English, in German, in human rights. And that just makes me such a better citizen of the world, because as a voter, I have to vote on all of these issues. As a person working in a company or an organization, I will be affected by all of these issues. As a human being in a conversation, the other person might be interested in any number of these issues. And being able to draw on what I have learned across these different disciplines, I think it just sets you up so well for life and all of these dimensions.
I'm getting familiar with that because my two grandchildren have joined LA and Duke.
Wonderful.
And I keep asking them, even the third or fourth month, I'm asking them, what are they studying? They say, we are not decided.
Yeah.
So I cannot imagine a situation like that. After 3 months in a college in India, you will be asked to take examinations and preparing for your degree and so on. And I'm attending various things. We'll decide one of these days. You know? That flexibility is amazing. I'm quite worried about it because of my own training, but this is how it is.
I think it definitely will take a mindset change among parents, because your grandchildren, it's 3 months in, they're like this. My roommate from college, who is one of my best friends, he came in as a physics major, didn't take a single physics class in his first year, decided very early on that he wanted to switch to economics, was an economics major for all of his first year, and then decided that it really wasn't right for him and that he wasn't enjoying it. And in his second year, switched to history, and then ended up being one of the top students in the history department. His thesis won a prize. He's now a very successful journalist. So the fact that in your second year, you could be shifting tracks, and that too going from physics to economics to history, I think is any Indian parents' worst nightmare. But it really allowed him to flourish in a way that I think if he had been forced to stick in physics, he just would not have.
No, but talking about choices, I don't know if you noticed it. In Kerala today, the most difficult courses you can get into are English literature and history, not chemistry and physics.
Right.
I don't know why, because what in terms of professions, how much can they get? But somehow there is a feeling, because some people get into central services, IAEA, etc. But that is very few. But still, the demand is for art subjects now.
Oh, wow. I wasn't familiar with that. And that's from the demand side, right? It's not that there's fewer seats, that's why it's more competitive?
Yeah, from an employment point of view, it's not at all competitive, because unless you go into management studies or something after that.
Right.
But the graduation in history or geography doesn't get you anywhere except teaching in schools or colleges. But still, the demand is so much for that. Every year I can see how many people are asking for, science subjects. They are not. Because those who are interested in science probably get away to medicine and engineering through the other methodology of test papers, etc. And those who go into graduate studies, even if they don't like it, they have to continue for 3 years. But this new system has really transformed it. And the other thing, of course, introduction of vocational training program, etc. And because we don't make a choice for our children, unlike in the US, decide whether everybody should go to the university. So here, everybody goes to university and take a PhD and then become a bus conductor. So you could have saved 10 years if you had gone straight to be a bus conductor. But we don't have that mindset. We don't think that my son should be a bus conductor, but he ends up as a bus conductor because of the system. And that is the tragedy of our education.
I think that's you raised 2 points on this as well as on the humanities conversation we were just having that is worth touching on, which is a lot of this is linked to what the job market demands and what's needed. And so there, on the English geography front, I'm starting to see some changes, and I hope that this changes more, which is that I think companies are starting to realize that for the vast majority of positions that they have, an engineering degree is not needed. And in fact, an engineering degree might hold you back if that position is more people-oriented, more about communication, learning how to write. All of those are much more valuable across
Degree, engineering
vast.
degree.
Yeah, I think if you look at a company, other than for the very narrow roles which are directly oriented on the product or the technology, most other roles, whether that's HR, finance, whether that's operations, customer relations, sales, marketing, none of those actually need that level of technical knowledge. And all of those much more require the ability to think critically, understand knowledge, and structure it well, to communicate it effectively. And I do think that most degrees should be teaching you that, but in particular, degrees in the humanities teach you that very well. So I think Indian companies are starting to realize that. I run an organization myself called Lumiere Education, and we have taken a lot of students who have backgrounds in political science and psychology and sociology, and their work has been fantastic within the organization. And so I think there's a lot of new companies, and then older companies are also starting to realize that and change. So I'm hoping that in a few years' time, your statement that the job opportunities for English and geography are mainly just teaching or continuing on to graduate school will no longer hold true.
Well, it's in another world, because look at United States. If you look at all the CEOs,
Correct.
you can find that most of them are art students, not engineers. Particularly the Indians who have gone on top of the of the companies in the US. Very few of them are engineers, I believe. So the more general studies and ability, in other words, seem to be more applicable there. But we do not have that kind of opportunities here. That's what we have to do. That's what somebody to get into even a major private sector. It's not very easy. And the problem is there is no linkage between the academia and the industry. The industry just comes to the university, pick up the best students and say, we are giving you this opportunity, without investing anything in that. So I kept saying that we must link up with the universities, and the industry must tell us what kind of graduates they need in the next 5 years. And we produce them at a price. They must pay for it. But neither side wants that, because the academic don't want kind of interference from the industry, and industry doesn't want to be dictated as to whether they should put their money where their mouths are. And so this has not worked.
Yeah.
So, and of course, particularly Kerala, we have no industries at all. So we only have the IT industry, and that is a different kind of a more. But in the IT industry, a lot of non-scientific, not technological education students also get into, because of the other skills.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's right. I can see both. I can see the concerns that both sides have, which is certainly I don't think that all seats at a university or all programs at university should be aimed and dictated entirely or exclusively by corporations. But I think getting their input on what kinds of skills are valuable can make a big difference in the employability of students. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was what you mentioned later on the bus conductor example. There, I'm always in a bit of a conundrum, because on the one hand, I think vocational schools can be really valuable, but my feeling is that they're valuable if two conditions are met, and those two conditions are that the roles that students who graduate from vocational schools enter are considered valuable in society. So as long as we have shame about our children working as plumbers or working as bus conductors, I think there'll always be this divide in society, which would be quite unfortunate. We don't want to create a system where those of a certain income category go to vocational school and become a sort of lower class citizens, and those who go to university access other opportunities. And the second thing is materially as well. There has to be a realistic way that even if you exit a vocational school, that you have some amount of economic and social mobility, so that those roles are compensated well and supported as well. So, but both of those seem like they're far off in India, which is why I'm a little bit nervous about this. So I'm curious how you think about it.
No, but there is really no point in sending everybody to a university.
Yeah.
There could be some kind of a discrimination in this, and which will be helpful to them because they will not be wasting their time and money on doing courses which may not be useful to them. But the point that you made, both are valid. One is dignity of labor, which we don't have. And the compensation system is totally upside down. The person who breaks the stones paid the least, and the IAS officer sitting in an air-conditioned room gets most. So, and that doesn't happen in a US system, doesn't it? Because the harder the job, you get a bigger salary. President of the US is not the highest paid person in the US. So, in our system, it is the other way. Because the hardest job gets the least salary. That's also changing definitely. But Mahatma Gandhi had said long ago that there should be a dignity of labor, because a plumber does as much of an important work as an IAS officer does. But that social recognition has not come. And therefore, this gap is still remaining, even though some people have started moving to professional jobs early in life. But the new education system, the vocational program is being introduced slowly. They are not cutting off. Slowly to enable them even to fix a, fix a wall or fix a window in your home later. That kind of technology is what the vocational thing has been taught, not to make them into a carpenter. So side by side, if that goes, at some stage they may be able to make a choice.
Absolutely. And I don't know any country that has gotten it perfectly right. I certainly don't think the US has, but maybe some of the European countries do have a bit more of equality among different professions there. But I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of the kinds of folks that I know or who'd be listening to this this interview, and I think until we are in a situation where we would say with pride, with satisfaction that our children have chosen to go into vocational school, I think that's the kind of world that we should be working towards, where there isn't a sense that one of these is significantly better and opens you up for more opportunities than the other. And I do think that with the changes in a lot of these industries, there's a lot of potential for that. So, for instance, if you look at the revolution in solar panels, for instance, which are becoming a lot cheaper, or electric vehicles, and all of these industries where it is going to create new jobs in manufacturing, in repair, in all of those sort of more vocational areas. There is a lot of potential there, is my understanding of it.
Well, in the US, those who go to community schools, community colleges, people think that they're a lower quality or whatever.
Right.
But many of them have done extremely well. I know CEOs who have been educated or not educated at all. Dropouts also do very well in the university. But those are exceptions. But part of the problem in India is this. I agree with all these constraints that you. But ideally, I'm saying, ideally there should be greater dignity of labor and better pay structure. But as somebody who has studied in the US, top universities, and also been in India, watching education system here, where exactly lies the difference? Is it the appraisal by the teachers, which makes a big difference in American universities? Here it is impersonal. Your paper answer book is given a false number so that nobody identifies who you are. That is objectivity at its height. And the other side, if you have a professor, I'm sure your Professor Khanna must have decided what your future is.
Yeah.
Nobody else matters, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you how good you are. Your supervisor, your professor will tell you, and that matters. Is that true?
I think that's definitely true to some extent. So just having gone from 12 years in CBSE straight to Harvard in the US, the one thing that I'll say the CBSE system had going for it is that it taught me to work really, really hard. So it is all about ensuring that you know the textbook inside out, that you've practiced every question from a past question paper 5 times over, that you burnt the midnight oil, and that you prepared hard. I think that's a really valuable skill, no doubt about it, and that's a good thing to inculcate in children and in students. But certainly at the university level, and probably even at the high school level, the sort of personalization that you talked about is so valuable. Because if you think about my experience at high school and even if I'd gone to an Indian university, it's quite likely that me and everybody else who joined in at the same time would be taking exactly the same classes, if not very similar classes. Whereas I think what I found at Harvard was that there was so much diversity in the kinds of classes that people could be taking. So, I could be taking a beginner math class while taking an advanced German class or an advanced French class. And that was true both at the high school level and at the university level. And that allows for students who need more help in certain areas to build up their skills, while allowing for those who have a strong background in something to really move forward and move closer to the cutting edge. And that was a wonderful experience, and that really allowed me to design a course for myself that was good and that pushed me and that allowed me to both work on my strengths and improve my weaknesses. So maybe not personalized at the sort of professor looking out for me level, because that was a mix. I had classes with 100 students, 300 students. I also had classes with 5 to 10 students, and the level of professorial involvement was different between the two. But by allowing me to pick the courses that I wanted, I think it allowed me to personalize the course for myself.
Yeah, but still the personal assessment is a significant thing, maybe at the higher level, PhD,
Yes.
maybe even more.
Yeah.
Because I know someone in Stanford, a professor who created, say, 18 super engineers, and they all started startup companies. And he is now drawing money from those companies because they made him director of all those. So he's a Stanford professor of engineering.
Yeah.
So such things, that relationship between the students and the professor is very strong elsewhere. Yeah. Here what happens is the teachers say, I don't want to be identified as marking him because he will not like it and our relationship will suffer and I'll be accused of favoritism or, vengeance or whatever. And therefore teachers are very unwilling to take on assessments. Yeah. They would rather, the students and the teachers would rather have their papers valued by some anonymous person sitting in Trivandrum, rather than in a village where the teacher knows you better than anybody else. Yeah. And so this idea of, affiliation is a big problem here, because these colleges are affiliated to universities. Yeah. The new education plan says affiliation will end in a few years, but it's unthinkable here now because the university controls everything in all the colleges. But how can a university control 600 colleges? So it is neither here nor there. So we introduced the autonomous colleges, and the universities became very hostile to them. That they were being, given privileges while the other colleges don't. So this is a kind of problems. Even after 75 years, we are fighting all these concepts while the world is going on.
Yeah.
It
reminds me of how Oxford is set up. So Oxford is a university, but it's a university comprised of, I think, about 30 different colleges. So there's St. John's College, which I'm a part of. There's Balliol, Magdalen, so many others. And there are faculty that are associated with each of these colleges. Each of the colleges has its own budget, its own governing bodies, its own president, and so on and so forth. And that really does lead to some real inefficiencies. So, for example, each of the colleges has its own libraries. And as a student at St. John's, I'm allowed to take books from the St. John's College library. But if I wanted to take a book from the Balliol College library, I'll have to write to the librarian, and the librarian will say, if they feel happy about and think my request is reasonable, will say, come in at Tuesday at 9 a.m. and you can take this book out, or you can read it in the library for a few hours. And to me, that's just bizarre, because this is all Oxford University, and they're literally locking in knowledge in one library and saying just because you're in the neighboring college, you're not allowed to access it anymore. And yeah, what you described, I think there's a smaller scale version of it here. Of course, the politics of it in the university college system in Kerala is probably a lot more sort of active and strong.
Much more restrictive than what you found there. Here, you cannot even enter another college.
Right.
And I developed some kind of a consortium system that is grouping, say, 5 colleges together and exchange teachers, library, examination system, etc. Nobody joined. They all said, we don't want it. We don't want other students to come to our university, ruin our libraries, and spoil our children. Everybody was very possessive. It did not work. Even distance education, they were not willing to accept. So the division is so much. And the university is simply some kind of a notional institution, which is supposed to do the studies program and syllabus and this, that, and the other. And also appointments of administrative jobs and things like that. And so I would certainly prefer a totally autonomous college system, like in many countries where there are no colleges like in Oxford. Everybody belongs to the same university and the college is a university.
Yeah.
So that I think is a better arrangement than this. I think provided those universities are, multidisciplinary and so on. But we have veterinary university, agriculture university, various kinds already in existence. That has to be changed also.
Yeah, I think so, because to me, the value of a university comes from the free flow of ideas, of people, and their ability to interact with each other and exchange with each other. And the more silos you create, whether that's in a college system or very strict divisions between departments, it just makes it much less likely that you can do the sort of creative and exciting work that happens when you put a bunch of talented and motivated people in one place and allow them to engage with each other.
Right. So, what is the medicine for Indian education in terms of reforms?
I wish I had one answer for that.
Let me try out my ideas.
Yes, please.
Pointed out 6 areas in which we need to work very hard. One, of course, is infrastructure. It's very poor in various systems. Second is teachers training, because there is really no training given to teachers on pedagogy. Right. I became an English teacher after passing my MA without a day of training. Nobody taught me how to teach. Then technology, absolutely not available. Now, of course, it is coming, but most computers were just kept there. It was never used. And then autonomy and internationalization and research. These are the 6 things that I said we must address. What do you think? Are these the right ones?
I think those all sound really, really important to me. And underlying all of that is also just the funding that is available to them and the structure in which they operate. Because what seemed to be missing from that list was some of the things we talked about earlier, which is a focus on outcomes and ability to review and track them, and a regulatory system that makes sure that universities are working towards that, and the funding that ensures that they can do that. And I think if you add those 2 pieces to the puzzle, then they can...
No, there are many more. I didn't say these 6 are exclusive. This was just a beginning. Even that, we did not make much of a success of it.
Yeah.
That's another story. Anyway, so, but since you know both the systems, I think many of us speak about systems without knowing the other one. I know the Indian system very well, but the other thing is just an imagination and some experience with my son in Colombia and things like that. But somebody who knows both the systems should be able to devise ways and means. In your NGO, I don't know whether you try to do that, but to try to see whether some of the systems can be brought here or whatever.
Yeah, so with Lumiere, it's a sort of social enterprise that I run. I think we are trying to do it, but we also see the limits of it. So what I mean by that is the idea of Lumiere is that students are working one-on-one with a research scholar on a research project. So it really goes very far in the direction of what you mentioned in terms of personalization, in terms of connection between the teacher and the student, because the student gets to work on whatever they want, and they've got this person who is guiding them through it. But the flip side of that, of course, is that then immensely limits the number of students that we can reach, because any sort of one-on-one system that has that level of personalization ends up being very expensive, ends up requiring a lot of oversight to make sure that all of the student mentor pairs are on the right track. And so we've, I think, done very well at achieving a high quality of outcomes, but it's come at the price of it being also very high investment for the students and for us. So I think there are some lessons from that for an education system more broadly, because personalization, focus on outcomes are all useful, but I don't think those are fully replicable, because when you have 300 million children in India and many more who are between the ages of 18 and 22, I think that's very different to working with 600 students over the course of a year.
Yes, also the teacher-student ratio.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be 17-1 or something in Harvard, right?
It varied by course. So the way that it worked at there was that there were some courses which were called lecture courses. So that would be a class of anywhere between 50 to 300 students that a professor is teaching. And then there are seminar courses where it'd be a professor, and this can be a Nobel Prize winning professor, and just 5 to 10 students, and you meet every week and you talk and understand the material. And so both of those types of classes existed. But even with the lecture classes, you would have these giant lectures with the professor, but then you have what's called section, where a PhD student who is in your field would guide you in a smaller group through whatever you had learned that week. So yeah, they definitely tried to maintain a low student-teacher ratio in some way or the other, even in situations where the main course was very, very large.
Yes, here, of course, every course is very large.
Yeah.
And in fact, the word lecturer is not being used now. But when I joined, I was called lecturer in English. So which meant I only had to go and lecture.
Right.
No interaction with the students or any kind of supervision, etc. But now we have abandoned that.
Right.
Now everybody starts as an assistant professor. That sounds more respectable. So that's good. So thank you very much for joining me today. But before you go about your study of international development, can you share some thoughts? What are you aiming at?
Yeah, so my research in the PhD focuses on India's startup ecosystem, and it's in the intersection of anthropology and economics, and is trying to understand India's startup culture as a culture. So what motivates startup founders and entrepreneurs? What is the logic of venture capital and why they make investments in certain companies but not others? How do startups and those within the startup ecosystem engage with social issues like gender inequality and so on? So those are some of the topics that my thesis focuses on. It's based on largely interviews with startup founders and investors. I had done about 2.5 months of field work before COVID hit, and I had to turn everything online. But thankfully, most of these people are digital natives, so it hasn't been too hard to do a lot of this research on Zoom and Skype instead. And so that's
digital divide.
No
digital divide. Yes.
Not in the startup world, but
it's a blessing in disguise of the pandemic, because when I talked about online education, when I was there, everybody kind of laughed at it.
Yeah.
Why are you going to waste your time on this? But now, if you had started it at that time, we would not have had all these problems we are facing today.
No, my PhD certainly wouldn't have been able to switch as easily. And Lumiere, the enterprise I run as well, is fully virtual, which is why you can have students from Vietnam or India or the UAE working with PhD students who are in the US and UK. And I don't think that would have taken off at all before COVID. I think COVID has really normalized the idea of doing a lot more things online, and seems like that's a change that's going to stay.
Yes, I see it as a blessing in disguise in some sense. But and also, even if the COVID disappears entirely and we are back to the old times, still it will continue because we have discovered so many things. Like how could I have interviewed you without WebEx? So and that's so we are discovering it. So I wouldn't have to invite you from Chennai to come to Trivandrum to talk to you about this. In the earlier days, we would have thought about that and look for money, look for resources, etc. So
we would not have met either because we would both have had to fly to Bombay to give that speech and meet in the auditorium. And once again, how unlikely would that have been? So, in fact, I run Lumiere with my friend Steven. We were classmates together in undergrad, but we founded the company together online and didn't meet in person until almost 6 to 8 months into running the company together. And that was just bizarre. It was just fully virtual. Yeah, it's a different world that we're in now, and it's totally fascinating.
So what will be your future plans? Will you go into the corporate world or start your own business, or what is it that you're planning to do?
Yeah, so in the long term, I definitely want to remain in this intersection of education and employment. So the topics I'm most interested in are in that education to employment pipeline. In the longer term, I certainly want to work on those issues through a nonprofit or international institution lens. So, something like the Gates Foundation or the World Bank or Pratham. I think all of these are very exciting organizations that do the kind of work that I would love to be doing in a few years' time. In the shorter term, the focus is finishing this PhD at some point and continuing to grow Lumiere and try and reach as many students as we can through that, because I found that to be a really useful learning process to understand how an organization is structured and built and grown over time.
And hit upon an idea and become a billionaire. Sure, that must be you.
I think I've been very lucky that after 12th standard, I haven't had to pay for education. So Harvard was on full financial aid, and then of course the Rhodes covered my master's and my PhD, and so I've been lulled into this sense of feeling that that if I'm doing things that I enjoy and that I'm working hard at it, the money will take care of itself. I'm sure I'm going to get a rude awakening someday about that, but for now, I don't think that money is the really motivating factor behind most of what I'm doing. Yeah.
No, but this is the way the system works now. If you hit upon an idea, you become a billionaire without doing anything. So wish you all the very best. Hope to see you in higher places.
Thank you so much. I know that this was meant to be a conversation where we talked about research and education, and I really think it has been a conversation in that I feel like I learned so much from you and your inputs and experiences, and hopefully I could bring a perspective that was interesting as well. And so thank you so much for having me on. I can't believe that an hour has passed by so quickly, and I'm really looking forward to someday doing this in person.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Bye-bye. Likewise.